Hi, I'm Kirk Kernut,
And I'm Ashley Gordon. Hey, there I am.
and welcome to another episode of Reading for the Rest of Us. This is a very exciting day for us because we don't always have guests here, but today we have two of them.
We do. It's exciting. We're pleased to have you.
Ashley, tell us a little bit about this was your idea for a show, and then we'll introduce our guests.
You keep saying that like if this really bombs, it's totally my fault. Okay, got it. Fine, it's all me. So as our loyal watchers will know, I'm on Facebook and Twitter and social media a good bit, and there was a point a couple of weeks ago where two storylines converged, and I thought this is something that we should talk about. So we have two guests today, and they are both from organizations that use books in what might be an unexpected environment. So first off, let's tell everybody who's here.
Okay.
And I'll tell you how we got to get them here.
Well, on your right is Carol Potok, who's the Director of Aid to Inmate Mothers, or AIM as we like to call it.
That's right. And on your left, Kyes Stevens, who is the director, and I'm cheating here because there's a lot of words and I tend to get them out of order. The Alabama Prison Arts and Education Project, Kyes Stevens. So, both of these organizations are on Facebook, and they posted within a few hours of each other. Kyes was looking for book donations for prison libraries. So we got into a conversation about what kind of books would that be and how can we help. And then Carol's organization, AIM, posted about their book group. So Carol actually hosts a reading group in Tutwiler. Is it at Tutwiler?
No,
or
at
is
the
it
Montgomery Women's Facility, actually.
Montgomery Women's Facility. Okay, thank you. So both of them were talking about the way books were being used in prison, and that seemed like the perfect opportunity to have both of them on Reading for the Rest of Us to tell the rest of us what it is you're doing with books in our correctional facilities here in Alabama.
Carol, why don't you tell us a little bit about AIM first off, just so for folks out there who may not be aware of what you all do.
Okay, well, I think a lot of people have not heard of us, but we have been around for almost 30 years, 28
Wow.
to be exact. And we were founded as a visitation program for moms in prison that had no way to transport their children to visit them. And we've been doing this program ever since. I think of that as our signature program, really about mothers and children.
And why is it hard for children to get to see their moms in prisons? I think there's some things geographically about Alabama and actually where we have our prisons. Isn't that part
Well,
of the challenge?
it's very typical, really, of women's prisons to be a long ways from where the children actually live. Most of the kids go to live with grandparents when the mothers go to prison, and the grandparents don't necessarily live close to the prison, and many of them don't have cars, or if they do have a car, it's a raggedy car, or they don't like to drive long distances, and maybe live in Huntsville. So you might go to prison for as long as 5-6 years, and during that time just see your children a handful of times. And our founders thought that that wasn't right, and so they set up a network of transportation across the state using church vans. And so that program still continues to this day. And since then we've branched out quite a bit and added other programs.
Cool. All right, so Kyes, tell us about what your organization does.
The Alabama Prison Arts and Education Project is a program in the College of Human Sciences at Auburn University, and we offer college-level classes at this point, not for credit, but in 10 prisons around the state. And
Wow, and see, that number really surprises me because I had worked with AIM, and so I knew about Tutwiler. I knew we had facilities for women and men. I had no idea that we actually had 10 prisons around the state, and that's not even all of it, is it?
No, if you count the work release facilities around the state, the number's closer to 30.
Wow, that's a lot of people. How many people are in prison in the state of Alabama?
I haven't looked at the DOC website for the specific number here lately, but it's probably somewhere towards 30,000.
30,000 people, okay.
Yeah.
So just to give us an idea of the size of the population, the community that you are working to reach out to. Okay,
Yes.
so sorry, keep
No,
going.
that's good. So we offer semester-long classes. It started with poetry, and then it moved to visual arts and
Started with poetry?
humanities. Yes.
Okay, poetry, visual arts, humanities.
And now we're doing STEM programming as well: science, technology, engineering, and math.
Wow. That's
So,
impressive.
yeah.
You know, it's interesting to me because I think there is a presumption out there that we think of books and reading and almost by extension literacy these days as kind of a luxury item. And I think programs like this really do demonstrate that books and reading are a very important aspect of our culture. So I was curious if each of you could just tell us what specifically is the role of the book in your group, and how does that help your audience grow or step forward in life? Carol, you want to start with that?
Well, I think that a lot of people don't realize this, but in prison, the women and the men have no access to the internet. And we're so oriented towards the digital world these days. But the books are really, to them, their escape, and it's a way of getting outside of the atmosphere in which they are in, you know, and some of them for long periods of time. And it, you know, it helps them keep themselves engaged in the world, keep thinking about things that, you know, that are outside their immediate environment. As far as, you know, books for the children, it keeps that connection. It's something that the women did when they were at home, and it allows them to, you know, read to their children. We haven't talked about this program yet, but the storybook program allows the moms to read on video to their children, and that is really a link to that child in a way that maybe a visit wouldn't be. So I think that the books really create for the women or remind them of the world outside, that this is not where they're going to be forever, hopefully, and gets them thinking again, using their brains.
We've always tried to emphasize on this show that books aren't an object on a shelf, that they are a sort of symbolic bond between people and larger communities. And I think both of these, both the reading group and the storybook program, are excellent examples of how we create bonds with other people through books. Kyes, do you want to?
You know, the literature classes that we offer we always have more students than we have room for. We always have more students than we have books for. And yeah, there's 1,000 stories I could tell. Students leave our class, they go back to their cell block or their dorms, and they teach, right? They share the books that they've been given, and then they share the lessons that have been taught to them because it is important to them. And I think reading inside of a prison on a very basic level is humanizing, right? It allows people to function and exist in a place that is not really set up for people to thrive. So books create community, they create dialogue. It allows relationships, positive relationships to build inside of prison, and those are hard, right? It's hard to find those outside of structured programs that come in from the outside.
How amazing to be a teacher of literature and have more students that want to be in your class than you can have room for.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. I'll tell you that right now.
That's really wonderful.
You're welcome to come teach with us.
Well, I think that actually brings up a really good point. So both of your organizations, before I say that, I know AIM relies on volunteers to execute a lot of these programs. You, God bless you, I swear I see you in probably every photograph that gets posted. It's like, when does the woman go home? And so I'm not quite sure to what degree the prison project relies on volunteers. So could you tell us a little bit about, when you are having these discussions about literature, or you're having these classes, who conducts them? Are they specially trained? Is it volunteers? Are there guest authors and teachers? Give us an idea of what this looks like when you get inside and are implementing these.
Well, I mentioned our storybook program. This is a program in which we bring video cameras out to the prison and allow the moms to make a videotape of themselves reading a children's storybook that they've chosen from a group of about 200 books. And we do use volunteers to run the video machines, and that frees the mother up just to read. So she doesn't have to worry about pushing the buttons and figuring out how the machine works. So that's one way in which we use volunteers. We also are always looking for books for that project, for children's books. We need paperback books. We will take used books as long as they're gently used.
Gently used,
We
right.
want them to look nice. We want the children to receive something nice. And in addition to that, we have our a monthly book club at the Montgomery Women's Facility, and it is set up like a regular book club. We need 10 copies of a book every month, and that is an expense that sometimes we can't meet. And so we're always looking for book clubs out there that maybe have bought a book and maybe everybody's finished reading it and wouldn't mind donating it to our group.
Oh, that's a great idea.
So that is another way that people can help us out.
And how do you, are there any criteria related to these books that people should keep in mind?
Well, with the children's books, we try to, we look for what we call picture books for kids around the age of 8 or 9. Those are the most popular. We also, of course, like the baby board books. As far as the book club is concerned, almost anything is acceptable. We don't try to censor the books. We try to keep them, you know.
We were actually talking before the show about some of the titles, and I think, you know, it was a great variety. You said you had done the Hunger Games, but at the same time you had done the Great Gatsby. And, you know, I think for folks who've never had the experience of a books in prison program or seeing that education go on, I always tell them, I was telling Carol about there's a scene in that TV show that everybody loves, The Wire, where the novelist Richard Price portrays a facilitator of a prison book club. And he's discussing The Great Gatsby with a group of incarcerated African-American men.
Interesting
and
element for a TV show.
Yeah, and it's an amazing scene because you really do see and it's a realistic scene. I mean, I've spoken with friends of mine who volunteer for programs like this, and they talk about it being a very common element of all book discussions. So, like we always say, it almost doesn't matter what book. You can get as much out of the Hunger Games as you can The Great Gatsby.
Right.
But what's important, I think, is that awakening of and that, you know, the application of those, what we in education like to call critical skills, but just what in the real world is thinking and interpreting and learning from those books.
You know, one thing that I think what's really important for viewers to think about is that it takes a space inside a facility for that to happen. And if there is not an external group coming in to facilitate that kind of discussion, that space doesn't happen, right? So it is the process of getting the books and leading the discussions. And from our standpoint, setting up college level class, they have a syllabus, they write papers, but you have to carve out a space inside for the reading and discussion to even take place.
And who does that? Do you have volunteers as well, or is it all certified teachers?
So all of our teachers, we hire people to teach with our program. They are not getting paid a lot, but they do get paid something, and the goal is to have people who are qualified to teach at the university level, because we are trying to create the structure of the college classroom. But, you know, that doesn't always happen. Fascinating story at a medium security men's facility. It's the first day of a college level literature class. We're reading multiple substantial novels, and this man is standing at the back of the chapel, and he's patiently waiting, and I'm looking at him and I'm wondering what's about to happen, because it's prison and you never know. And finally we said, are you here for class? And he says, well, maybe. And this dialogue ensues, and it comes to find out he cannot read or write at all. And he wants to take this literature class, college level literature class. So the discussion with the teacher was, this is going to be a lot of work. Are you up for this? And the teacher was like, sure. So every single week, a different student in the class read the novel to this man, right? And that same person on any given week would write his reading response. And on the last day of class, he turned in his essay, and he had written the first 3 sentences. All the letters were squished together, there was no punctuation, but he used this as a catalyst to say, okay, now I can go to adult basic education.
Excellent.
And if you don't have the space and the opportunity for people to try to do something different with their life, they're not gonna.
That's a wonderful story. And it so perfectly embodies the idea of literature as a bridge, and why it's important to not just have self-help classes or things that are more practical in nature, but why literature is key in these types of programs.
You guys don't just read your own books, but you also produce your own books,
That's true.
actually. And so I was going to invite each of you to sort of tell us a bit about your anthology projects that you do. Carol, do you want to start on that?
Well, our project was quite a few years ago now. We had started providing creative writing classes that brought in writers from around the state to talk about the books they had written and get the women to discuss them and learn about writing and do some writing of their own, actually. And there was a lot of writing going on. And in fact, in the very beginning, Kyes and I collaborated on a writing class, and with Ashley, Ashley also, and I'm sorry, Ashley,
No, that's okay.
Forget you. But the book that we produced was really something that Ashley worked very, very hard on, and it's called The Right to Remain Silent. We still have that in it's still
Still in print.
thank you.
Yeah.
Looking for the words there. And it's available if anybody wants to purchase it. They can contact us on our website or email us. Is our contact information available? Yes, we're going to make that available.
Yeah.
But it was really a labor of love. I think that the women worked very, very hard on it. I think that it's an incredibly interesting and moving book. There are photographs of the women, and they're really, really proud of it. Some of them, most of the women in the book are now home, but they still ask for copies. They're not. It's something they're very, very proud of, and they want to show people even now.
And they should be. And one of the things that was so striking about it, and it was truly a remarkable experience, but by their own choice, they not only had their portraits, which truly were beautifully done, and I think regardless of where you are as a woman, you're aware of what you look like. And so our photographer did really beautiful headshots of each of them. But what was listed with their photographs were their prison number and why they were there. And when we talked about this in the class, they were concerned that this not be presented as, they didn't want to be making excuses, and they were not asking for sympathy. It was a moment of taking control of their own lives and saying, this is why I'm here, and this was, I got myself here, and I will get myself out. And it was a very empowering thing for them, and certainly a humbling and empowering thing to watch. So it was remarkable. And I'm holding yet another anthology.
Yeah.
You get the benefit.
So we used to produce our anthologies every year. Now we are producing them every 2 years. And students who complete creative writing classes or visual arts classes submit work to be, we have a review panel, and we accept at least one of their pieces, right? So everybody who completes a class gets something in the book. And it's stunning to me, not only I'm going to try to get the glare off of it, there we go. It's stunning to me not only the impact for the individual who has drawn the picture or created the poem or written the story, but the connection that it gives them to their family. I mean, most of these folks send them to their family, their kids specifically. We had one older gentleman who got tears in his eyes, and generally when my students get tears in their eyes, I get tears in my eyes. And he said, my daughter told me that she was proud of me. Now this is not something that a
they
parent
hear on a
in prison
basis.
hears on a regular basis. So we do have these available. We have lots of past editions as well. You're welcome to contact me at it's www.auburn.edu/APAEP.
Yeah, and we will certainly on our Facebook page have links to both organizations so that you can contact them and donate should you choose to, or volunteer, which I would highly recommend if there's an opportunity for you to do that, because it is a completely life-changing experience without a doubt.
You know, as a teacher of writing, I think sometimes I have a hard time really conveying to students what the value of being able to produce not just a work of creative writing, but nonfiction, or sort of that link between being able to articulate experience and the discovery that goes on through the writing process, a sense of self-awareness, a sense of understanding one's own experience. So I'm wondering, when your people go through these writing classes, or they have these writing classes, and the sense of accomplishment that comes out, how do they feel they've been able to change by the fact that they've written this and now it's published?
One of our students, he is at a medium security facility, actually not terribly far from here. He said once that inside of prison you are what you talk about, and that lots of people are talking about how to get drugs, how to get out, how to they're engaged in a very negative conversation, because that is the conversation that is the structure of the prison. And he said to me, he's like, so all of your students talk about poetry and literature and science and math, and so it's an opportunity for them to create a subculture and a community inside of the prison that is based on learning and creating and exploring in a very positive structure.
There's so many things that I think most of us, it would never occur to us that our only subjects of conversation would be negative. And that it's probably true for people. We don't even realize that we fall into those negative patterns. And yet to talk, to be able to give, to promote that positive conversation, that I would think it would be the same way with women and their children. Because all parents want to talk about their children, much to everybody else's chagrin, probably. So for these women to get to talk about the visit with their child or the book they read to them, is it a similar situation where it gives them something positive to say about their relationship with their child?
It gives them things positive to talk about, and it also gives them something positive to talk to their children about. When you're in prison, there's not a lot to tell your child of a positive nature. The child always wants to know, Mommy, when you coming home? And sometimes there's not a good answer to that. But if you can send a book and read a book, or when they visit, play games, as we do at our visitation, so that the conversation can flow a little more naturally. It gives that mother and child the gift of conversation and of a natural kind of relationship that they might have had if she hadn't gone to prison.
Have you seen the mothers who read to their children? Have you seen the children then want to become readers because of that bond?
Well,
with
we've
the
only
child?
really heard about it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the children, we send so many books out, about 1,300 a year. It's a very large program. And so we can only wait to hear back from the guardians. And we get some wonderful responses. I mean, just that the kids have a library, that they protect them, they won't let anybody touch them, and that they go back to them. And some of the books they read over and over again. So I think that it does encourage the children to read, and it certainly encourages the moms to want to go home and do that again. It's a real measure of what they've lost, I think, and in some ways it's heartbreaking, but at the same time it's giving them a chance to regain that.
So before we go, if you could again talk a little bit about how you work within communities, how you share your stories of what's happening. I keep coming back to the idea that I think this is a world that most people are not privy to. Very few people have visited the inside of a prison. There was a story I was telling about my son. I was taking him actually to Camp Chandler. And we were riding past Tutwiler, and he saw it, and he said, Mom, what is that? I mean, it was not even part of his consciousness. And so I explained to him what it was, and I said, I actually worked there for doing some teaching. And his question was, were the women nice? And he wanted to know about the class and about the women and what we did, what we talked about, and what we read. And I was so delighted that he skipped right over the part of, well, why were they there and was it scary? And I was able to say quite honestly, yeah, they were great. We had wonderful discussions, and we had authors come, and just to work with students who just want to absorb everything. They're like sponges, and they're so interesting and interested. So if you could, just before we go, give us a little bit of a picture of if somebody did want to help, if they did want to get involved, what would that look like? What would you say was, here's how you do that. Here's how you make this part of your life. Is that a hard question?
It can be or it cannot be. I think you just have to start, right? If this is a group of people that you're interested in working with, then you find somebody in your community that you can reach out to. So for us and the community of readers that are going to be seeing this, clean off your bookshelves and send us your books. And I know that people have very intense relationships to some of their books. They're like family members, and I totally get that. But as a book nerd, I also understand that I have a pretty remarkable hoarding tendency with books. When you put a book inside of a prison, it's going to potentially be read 10 times a week. A week. And sitting on your shelf, it might get read once in the next 5 years, right? So you're not, if you really love books, it's actually the best thing for the book to get it into places where people are going to read them. I mean, I go to prisons and there are men gluing the spines of books back together because they don't want to throw the book away. If we saw the book, we'd be like, that book has seen better days, toss it. But they glue them back together. So send books. I think I can speak for both of our programs to say that we are consistently in need of funds to run our programs.
Very true.
And that is not an exaggeration.
Imagine a large part of your energies both go toward fundraising, to where you have to just be able to do that to sort of sustain the program, much less grow it. So.
And you mentioned when you were first talking about the storybook program and the book group, 5 or 6 years and they go home, but that's a big gap between a mother and a child and what's going on in that child's life. But 5 or 6 years and they go back home. So when I was working regularly with the program, people asked me, well, why are you doing this? There's so many needy constituencies out there, why this one? And from a purely practical standpoint, if the compassion of it doesn't get you, from a practical perspective, many of these people will go home and they will have to rebuild their lives in their communities. And this is a way of giving them skills to do it. Is it skills? Is it like you said, is it connection? What's the practical value of what you're doing?
Well, I think, as you say, people really have in their minds an idea of who people are in prison. They don't ask; they already have it in their heads that these are people that deserve to be there. They put themselves there. So why should we want to help them? And the reason is partly that they're going home. Of course, we also once you meet them, you realize that they're really not that different from you and me.
Right.
They're
really for the grace of God.
And we need to help them because their parents, that are going home to their kids. Do we want them to come home bitter and angry and not capable of really transitioning back into the world, or do we want to help them out and keep those bonds with those children and make it so that they're interested in the world and remember the things they're good at? I think the answer is very clear.
And you said when you were talking before, and Kyes heartily agreed, the person doesn't go to prison, the family goes to prison. Everyone that they love to some degree is impacted by this, goes with them.
And so when you invest in people who are in prison, and it is an investment, right, and they are human beings, when you invest in those human beings, you are also investing in those families, which means that you are investing in our communities, which means you are investing in our state, which is the appropriate thing to do.
Thank you both so much for being
we
with
really
us
appreciate
today.
this.
This has been a wonderful conversation. I want to thank Ashley for coming up with this great idea. And again, we will have on social media ways in which you can contact both of these groups.
And again, it's Aid to Inmate Mothers, right? And I'm going to let you say
the
it.
Alabama Prison Arts and Education Project.
Great. So Kyes Stevens, Carol Potok, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us, and please do take a moment to go through your bookshelves and find at least one book or two books that you could donate, one each, to these fine programs. Thank you very much.